There is a certain kind of soul that walks this world quietly. They don't demand attention. They don't seek control. They simply are open-hearted, honest, vulnerable, the kind of person who sees the best in others, not because they're blind, but because they choose to believe in goodness. And that kind of soul is rare, sacred even. But sacred things are often misunderstood and sometimes destroyed, not by accident, but by those who saw the light and hated it, by those who mistook kindness for weakness and innocence for ignorance. They smiled while they plotted. They stayed close only to strike deeper. They betrayed the purest soul, and they thought they got away with it. But what they didn't know is that when you violate something sacred, and you don't just break it, you curse yourself. The innocent as the sacred archetype. There is a kind of strength in this world that doesn't shout. It doesn't dominate a room or command with force. It listens, it gives. It opens its heart fully, fearlessly, even when the world has given it every reason to shut down. This is the strength of innocence, not ignorance, not naivety. True innocence is aware of the darkness. It's seen pain. It's known betrayal before. But it chooses not to become bitter. It chooses to love anyway. And in doing so, it becomes something sacred. These people, the ones who love with both hands open, who trust without demand, who forgive without hesitation, they are walking reminders of how things could be. They represent the part of humanity we lost somewhere along the way, the child before the trauma, the artist before the criticism, the friend before the betrayal. And that's why they're so dangerous to the broken. Because when someone who has buried their own innocence sees it alive in someone else, it's like holding a mirror to a wound they never treated. It hurts. It threatens the illusion they've built, the story that says kindness is for fools and vulnerability is suicide. And when people can't handle the reflection, they don't look away, they smash the mirror. The betrayal of the pure isn't accidental. It's calculated, because to some, the existence of uncorrupted goodness is unbearable. They need to tear it down, not because it's wrong, but because it's right, because it exposes everything they're not. This is why the innocent are not just victims in stories. They're symbols. They're archetypes, timeless, transcendent. The lamb in the ancient texts, the child in the storm, the one who walks through fire without losing their soul. And when that kind of soul is betrayed, the world doesn't just lose a person, it loses a standard. It loses a possibility. And whether the betrayer realizes it or not, they've set something in motion they can't control. Because when you strike down something sacred, the wound doesn't stay where you left it. It echoes. Betrayal is a mirror of the betrayer's soul. Betrayal doesn't reveal the flaws of the one betrayed, it reveals the rot in the soul of the one who commits it. When someone turns against a pure-hearted person, they often cloak their actions in justifications. They were too trusting, they were too soft, they should have known better. But all of those excuses are just armor to hide a deeper truth, that the betrayer couldn't bear to stand in the presence of something they had long since abandoned. You see, betrayal is not just an act of deception, it's an act of projection. It projects inward resentment outward, punishing another for possessing what the betrayer secretly wishes they still had. Innocence, hope, honesty, integrity. The pure soul becomes a threat, not because they have done wrong, but because they represent a life not yet corroded by cynicism. And so, rather than confront their own decay, the betrayer attacks what is good to validate their own collapse. They need the innocent to fall so they can pretend that everyone eventually does. But what they fail to see is that every dagger they throw is another crack in their own reflection. Every lie, every manipulation, every betrayal is not just a wound inflicted outward, it is a wound turned inward, festering in the psyche. That's the quiet irony. Those who betray think they are winning, that they've outsmarted, outplayed, outlasted, but they're not climbing higher. They're digging deeper, deeper into shame, deeper into emptiness, deeper into the echo chamber of their own unresolved guilt. And sooner or later, that weight catches up. Because when you betray someone who stood in the light, you don't pull them into darkness. You only prove that you never left it. Spiritual consequence is real even if unseen. In a world obsessed with proof, with outcomes you can measure, record, and post online, it's easy to forget that not everything real is visible. Some things don't show up on paper. They don't leave evidence in a courtroom. They don't broadcast themselves with flashing lights. And yet, they are no less devastating, no less real. Betrayal is one of those things, not just for the person betrayed, but for the betrayer. When someone violates the trust of a pure soul, they may walk away thinking they've succeeded, that they've escaped judgment, that because there was no immediate backlash, no consequence delivered by human hands, they've gotten off clean. But they haven't, not really, because the universe doesn't operate like a courtroom. It doesn't care about timing the way we do. It moves through conscience, through memory, through the quiet spaces of the human heart, and in that realm justice is slow but precise. Spiritual consequence isn't lightning from the sky, it's erosion from the inside. It begins subtly. Sleepless nights, that lingering discomfort in the back of your mind, a creeping sense that something is missing, and no amount of distraction or success or noise can fill it. You see, when someone commits betrayal, especially against a soul that was kind, gentle, and undeserving of that wound, they fracture something in themselves, and it doesn't heal with time. It hardens. This is the curse, not a spell, not a superstition, a reality. The curse of knowing that you are no longer who you were before you committed that act. That no matter how well you perform in public, a part of you knows what you did when no one was watching. You can lie to others. You can wear a mask. You can pretend to be someone noble, someone justified. But you can't escape your own memory. That's the spiritual prison. And what's worse, the world will often reward the betrayer in the short term. It will hand them the illusion of victory. They might get the job. They might win the argument. They might manipulate their way into influence or admiration. But all of it rests on a fragile foundation because they're building a life on dishonor. And sooner or later that catches up because nothing built on betrayal lasts. Not relationships, not reputations, not peace. Inside there is a slow unraveling. Integrity, once broken, doesn't scream. It fades, and the person finds themselves unable to connect the way they once did. Trust becomes difficult, not just from others, but from within. How can you trust yourself when you know what you're capable of? When you've crossed a line you swore you never would? That's the true cost of betrayal, the loss of your own self-respect. And it creates a feedback loop. The more you deny it, the more you have to numb it. The more you numb it, the more disconnected you become. And the more disconnected you become, the more likely you are to betray again, until the conscience is so dulled, you don't even remember what it felt like to be sincere. That's when the soul starts to decay, not in some mystical way, but in a very real psychological sense. The heart hardens, the joy disappears, and even the victories feel hollow. Meanwhile, the person who was betrayed, the one who was pure, the one who was wounded, they carry their pain. But they also carry something else: clarity, because suffering clarifies, it teaches, it purifies. And if they don't let the bitterness take over, they often rise from the ashes stronger than ever, more discerning, more resilient, more awake. That's another part of the curse. The one who betrayed often watches, helpless, as the one they tried to destroy becomes something greater. You can't outrun the weight of what you do to someone who never deserved it. You might silence them. You might erase the message thread, clean your hands, and smile like nothing happened. But in the silence of your own mind, in those moments when the noise fades, it will return. The memory, the guilt, the look in their eyes, and no external validation will drown it out. Because the spiritual world doesn't care about your followers. It cares about your soul. And the soul keeps score. The pure soul doesn't need revenge. Time does the work. The instinct to strike back is ancient. It sits deep in the nervous system. That flash of anger, the thirst for justice, the craving to make them feel what they made you feel, especially when you were the one who walked in with good intentions, especially when you were real, honest, vulnerable, and they took that as an invitation to tear you apart. When someone you trusted, someone you believed in, decides to betray you, the fire it ignites inside is not just pain, it's rage, not just heartbreak, it's disbelief. You want them to hurt. You want the world to see what they did. You want them exposed, undone, shattered, the way they left you. But here's the paradox. The purest souls rarely act on that impulse. Not because they're weak, but because they understand something deeper. They know that revenge changes nothing, doesn't rewind time, it doesn't unbreak trust. It doesn't clean the stain, it just spreads it. When you choose vengeance, you step into the same darkness that wounded you, and suddenly you're no longer the one who was wronged, you're the one doing wrong. And that's not who you are. The pure soul doesn't need revenge because they don't live by the same rules as the ones who hurt them. They don't operate on the currency of power, fear, and control. They're not trying to win the game. They're trying to stay whole. That's the real battle, not to destroy the betrayer, but to not become them. To hold on to your softness in a world that keeps trying to harden you. To stay kind in a world that rewards cruelty. That's strength most people will never understand. But here's the truth no one talks about. You don't need revenge because time has a way of doing what you can't. Life has a rhythm, a strange way of circling back. The same hand that throws a knife eventually has to live with empty hands. The same mouth that lies will one day run dry when no one believes them anymore. The people who betrayed you might laugh today. They might walk away with their head high, convinced they've escaped. But time has its own sense of gravity. It pulls everything downward eventually. And when it does, all the masks fall off. And they will face themselves. Because no one escapes accountability forever. Maybe not in court, maybe not in public, but privately, in their relationships, in their self-image, in the moments they're alone with nothing but their own thoughts. The reckoning always comes. It might look like a failed connection they can't understand, or a cycle that keeps repeating in their life, causing pain they can't explain. But it's the return, it's the bill coming due. Meanwhile, the soul that was betrayed, the one that stayed silent, the one that chose healing over hate, that soul grows. It strengthens quietly, not in a loud, dramatic way, but like roots growing under the surface, deeper, wiser, stronger. And at some point, those who hurt you will look at the person you've become, and they'll feel it, the weight of their decision, the moment they could have stood beside you, but instead chose to strike. And by then you won't need revenge. because your peace will speak louder than their shame. Your resilience will echo louder than their excuses. Time does something revenge never could. It reveals. It brings to the surface what everyone thought was buried. It exposes motives. It clarifies truth. And it hands people the consequences of their own choices, whether they're ready or not. There is nothing more powerful than watching life deliver the lesson you never had to. But that only happens if you step back, if you choose healing over hostility, if you let go of needing to prove anything. Because your dignity is your proof, your integrity is your witness, and when the dust settles, people always remember who stayed silent with grace and who destroyed with lies. You don't need to burn anything down. Time is already doing its work. The pure soul walks away, not because they're powerless, but because they're powerful enough to let go. And letting go is not surrender. It's mastery. It's knowing that justice doesn't always arrive when you want it, but it always arrives in ways no one sees coming, in places no one expected. And when it does, it doesn't knock. It enters like truth. Quiet, cold, unavoidable. Redemption is possible, but not without atonement. There's a temptation to believe that some people are beyond redemption, that once someone betrays a soul that was pure, once they shatter trust that was freely given, they've crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. And in many ways, that's true. Some lines once passed change everything. Things don't go back to how they were. Innocence doesn't return. Trust, once broken, is never quite the same. But even so, redemption is possible. It's not easy, not automatic, but possible. And the path to it is not paved with apologies or shallow regret. It doesn't come through scripted words or performative guilt. Real redemption begins where denial ends, in the raw, unbearable weight of responsibility. The moment a person stops explaining why they did what they did, stops pointing to their past, stops blaming the world around them, and simply says, "I was wrong," that's where healing starts. That's where the curse begins to break. You see, people often confuse forgiveness with forgetting, or redemption with quick relief. But the soul doesn't work that way. The wound isn't healed just because you feel bad, and you don't earn your way back just because you want to. Atonement isn't a feeling, it's a process. One that requires honesty so brutal most people run from it. It's not just about facing what you did, it's about facing who you were when you did it. That's the hardest part. Looking in the mirror and seeing the version of yourself you tried to bury. Redemption demands that you sit with that version and refuse to look away. It demands that you name every part of the betrayal, the manipulation, the silence, the excuses, the selfishness, the lies. It asks that you not only understand the damage you caused, but feel it, and not just for a moment, but long enough to reshape you. Because if betrayal is the collapse of character, then redemption is its reconstruction, brick by brick, thought by thought, action by action. And the process hurts. It requires sacrifice. Pride has to die. Entitlement has to be stripped away. The ego, that voice that says, "I had my reasons," has to be silenced completely. And for many, that price is too high. So they avoid it. They rewrite the story in their head. They pretend the person they hurt was exaggerating. They tell themselves it wasn't that bad, or they'll get over it. But deep down, they know the truth is still there, unanswered, unresolved. Like a fire quietly burning behind the walls, And until they face it, they carry it into their next relationship, into their silence, into every moment they can't explain why they feel empty, restless, or disconnected. That's the curse. Unatoned guilt becomes a shadow. It follows you. It whispers in your ear when things go quiet. It shows up in your inability to be vulnerable. It infects your capacity to love. Because love without accountability isn't real, and neither is healing without pain. But there is another path. Not easy, not fast, but real. A path that says, I will take responsibility even if it breaks me. A path that accepts that forgiveness might never come from the person you hurt, but that doesn't stop you from becoming someone worthy of it. That kind of redemption, the slow, painful, authentic kind, doesn't erase the past, but it reclaims the future. And it changes the person, not just externally, but deeply. They begin to walk differently, think differently, love differently. Because once you've truly carried the weight of your own failure, you develop a reverence for trust, a sacred respect for vulnerability. You become someone who doesn't take lightly the kind of soul you once wounded. That's the paradox of redemption. It costs everything. But if you go through it honestly, you gain something far more valuable, your soul back. And if the person you hurt sees that change, not just hears your words, but feels the transformation, then maybe, just maybe, reconciliation is possible. But that's not the goal. The goal is truth. The goal is restoration of integrity, even if the relationship is lost. Because the highest form of atonement is not to be forgiven, it's to become someone who would never do it again. So yes, redemption is possible, but only if you're willing to walk through fire, not for attention, not for approval, but because your conscience won't let you do anything else. Because deep down, beneath the excuses, beneath the story you told to justify the damage, a part of you still remembers who you were before the betrayal. And that part is still waiting, not for comfort, but for courage.